In the early days of flying, there weren't many planes in the sky, but by the 1920s, commercial and cargo aviation was starting to take off. And a new problem became apparent. How do you keep all those planes from running into one another? 100 years later, we've got more air traffic than ever before, and the system for deciding which planes can safely go here and there is a lot more elaborate than the one that evolved in the 1920s. Still, when that system has problems, tragedy can result, like the accident here at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. last January, when 67 people were killed. And the system seems to be breaking down a lot lately. Newark Airport in New Jersey is one of the busiest in the whole country, but it's currently facing staffing shortages that the Federal Aviation Administration says it can't fix, even though it is supposedly in charge of America's air traffic control system. Other airports are having issues too. So I want to know what's driving those problems and how to fix them. But first, I want to understand how the air traffic control system works and why it's set up the way it is. So those early days of flying were pretty chaotic. There was no radar, no radio communication. Pilots flew where they wanted, when they wanted, and they did their best to avoid one another, but they were not always successful. In 1926, Congress passed a law telling the Secretary of Commerce to come up with air traffic rules and basic navigational routes across the country. While that was happening, airports were already developing a rudimentary air traffic control system that arose mostly out of necessity and improvisation. The very first air traffic controller was a guy named Archie W. League, who worked at the airport in St. Louis, Missouri, starting in 1929. Yes, that's 26 years after the Wright brothers made their first flight, and it's 12 years after the first commercial air service in the country. Archie would sit next to the runway in St. Louis with a pair of signals telling planes to hold or go. Advancements in electric lights and radio technology made guys like Archie obsolete, but the extent of air traffic control was still quite limited. More or less, it was just focused on preventing collisions, on takeoffs and landings. In the 1930s, airlines worked together to set up 3 air route traffic control centers that served as hubs for coordinating and tracking flights between airports. And in 1938, the federal government set up the Civil Aeronautics Authority, which assumed control over every aspect of air traffic control and was later replaced by the FAA. The technology that governs air traffic has come a long way since 1938, of course, but the entire system is still regulated and controlled by the federal government. So what is the FAA doing, or failing to do, that's created the mess we're seeing today?
I think the underlying problem is that you have an organization that is not fit for purpose when it comes to delivering air traffic control.
This is Dorothy Robbins. She's a senior fellow at Brookings and a former White House staffer. She's been writing and speaking about the need for air traffic control reform since the 1990s.
Air traffic control is a 24/7 operation. It's a business in quotes. It's being run out of a regulatory agency. That's a fundamental clash.
Air traffic control was thrust into the spotlight after the midair collision in D.C. in January. The full investigation of that incident is still ongoing. Meanwhile, in Newark, controllers have lost contact with planes for as long as 90 seconds. And staffing shortages have forced the airport to reduce the number of flights in and out.
The problem is they simply don't have enough air traffic controllers, as we've been reporting for some time here.
President Donald Trump has vowed to fix all of this.
After many years of decline in our air traffic control system, the One Big Beautiful Bill will modernize this decrepit relic and give America the best, most advanced air traffic control system on Earth.
But the Trump administration's plans so far seem to involve just throwing money at the problem and hoping that that solves it. And we've tried that once before. In 2007, the Bush administration spent billions of dollars to modernize air traffic control's computer systems, with the goal of tripling air capacity by 2025. Hey, it's 2025 right now, so let's check on how that's going. Not so well. Last year, the Department of Transportation reported that the effort has been less transformational than originally promised. More money probably won't solve this problem. The root of it actually runs much deeper than that. It goes all the way back to the way that air traffic control was set up in the first place.
The biggest single problem with the current situation is that you have the Federal Aviation Administration both operating the air traffic control system and regulating the air traffic control system. That's a huge conflict of interest. You cannot both conduct the orchestra and play an instrument in the orchestra.
This conflict of interest shows up in a bunch of different ways, but probably the most obvious and important is when it comes to spacing out planes in the air. Remember our old pal Archie with his flags for hold and go? The question, in effect, is how much time should elapse between each go signal? Less time between planes means more capacity in the system, and you can put more planes in the air. But too little time between each go increases the risk of a collision.
And that trade-off gets made, but you want it to be made in a way that's transparent. Right now, it is not transparent because it's being made internally within one organization, the FAA.
So if they were separate entities, then air traffic control could say, we think this is what we need, and the FAA could say, we'll review that, we'll decide. The FAA, the government still maintains
the regulator.
That regulatory authority.
Exactly.
They're operating kind of in opposition to one another.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So imagine someone who works for the FAA and someone who works for some other FAA-regulated job. Do you really think they're going to be treated the same?
Anecdotally, people in the industry say there is a difference in how the FAA treats pilot fatigue and controller fatigue, or a screw-up by a pilot and a screw-up by a controller. They have not historically come down as hard on controllers because that's part of the family, as they have come down on pilots.
As long as air traffic control is run by the FAA, the system will always be controlled by politics. And this shows up in all sorts of ways, but let me give you a particularly egregious example. Right now, every air traffic controller in the country has to go through training at a single facility in Oklahoma City. But okay, if we have a shortage of controllers right now, maybe it would make sense to have a second academy that could also train them. And last year, the Senate drafted a bipartisan plan to do exactly that. And then that bill got killed by Oklahoma's congressional delegation, which would rather have had the money spent expanding their own facility.
The FAA sees Congress as its customer. The FAA leans toward Congress because that is where their money comes from.
So how should this work instead? If air traffic control wasn't part of the FAA, it could be funded by the airlines, by private jets, and by other planes that use the system, and that need it to work. Basically, Archie should be allowed to control the flags. The government should regulate how he does it. Right now, the government is trying to fulfill both functions simultaneously, and that makes it harder to fix the problems within the system. So splitting air traffic control out of the FAA might seem like a radical, scary proposal, but actually, more than 90 countries have already enacted similar reforms. In Canada, the non-governmental air traffic controllers handle 50% more traffic with 30% fewer people, because the system has been properly funded and upgraded by the people and businesses that most directly benefit from it. And pilots prefer it. Flying over the US-Canadian border is like time travel for pilots. Going north to south, you leave a modern air traffic control system run by a company and enter one in which the government is struggling to catch up. That's something that Scott McCartney, the Wall Street Journal's travel columnist, wrote all the way back in 2016, nearly a decade ago. And America has only fallen further behind since then. Basically, air traffic control should operate like a public utility. When you flush the toilet or flip on a light switch, you don't worry about whether it's going to work, and that's because those services are provided by people who know what they are doing, and they are funded by the people who use them. You, when you flip the switch or flush the john.
The FAA regulates every aspect of the aviation industry: the construction and maintenance of aircraft, the operation of airlines, the training of pilots. Every aspect of the system they regulate, and the FAA regulates it from arm's length. They are not involved in the operation of any of those things, which allows them to be an effective regulator and a credible regulator.
The air traffic control system should be no different. This is too important to let the government continue to run, and you shouldn't have to worry about whether it's going to work or not.